Hello everyone, welcome to our sew along. There are a couple of things I'd like to share with you before I get started on the part of the Duck Duck Goose project that I wanted to show you tonight. So some of you who have followed me for a while probably know that I've had several patterns published in several magazines. The Fons and Porter Love of Quilting and the Quilting Quickly, and I think it was just called Scrap Quilts. Well, a pattern that I had in a magazine, I can't remember, I think it was Scrap Quilts or Quilting Quickly. It has shown up again in the current issue of Quick and Easy Quilts, and it's still a great pattern. It uses jelly rolls. Of course, you can cut your own jelly rolls, but this is the cover. It is the, oh my goodness, I've lost it, the July-August of 2022 Quick and Easy Quilts. And so you can look for that, and you can find it in your grocery store or wherever you buy magazines. So look for it's called Mary Jane's 9-Patch Squared. And so it's been hanging in the shop for a while. In fact, I've actually made it again recently on point. So the picture you see in here is set straight. And in the shop, we have one of these versions plus one that's set on point. So something for you to look for. So tonight we're going to continue with our Duck Duck Goose center medallion block. So I wanted to kind of share with you, this is what we've gotten done so far. So we made the flying geese, and you had the option of making some wild goose chase blocks. And then the corners, last week we made some shaded 4-patch units to go on it. And I'll show you what I have. This is my shaded 4-patch units. So in order to change this, I can actually change this by chopping off the point of my shaded 4-patch and replacing it with a pop of black. And we're going to actually be using the corner pop tool to do that. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But I wanted to show you why I did that. This is the duck and ducklings block. And it has that same shape. It kind of starts with a shaded 4-patch and then a popped off corner. And this actually, the corner that you replace it with is a background fabric. So that's one color option. If you like scrappy, you could actually do this. There's a duck and ducklings block. Here's a single block. Let me put that on the top so you can see it. There's a duck and ducklings single block. And of course you could do any color you wanted to. This one is a scrappy version where each individual block has 4 of the same combination of units. So if you take this block and instead of putting the shaded 4-patch in the corner, replace it with, I moved it and now I got to find it. Not that one. Not that one. There it is. Replace it with the duck and ducklings corner, you get a block, and I called it Going Quackers. So I'm going to show you how I did that shaded 4-patch with the popped corner here using the shaded 4-patch units that I made last week. So here's my shaded 4-patch units. If you didn't see that and you're not sure how to make shaded 4-patch units, go back and watch session 4, but I'll let you in on a little secret. We're going to be doing these again. But you're going to take your shaded 4-patch units, and they've been trimmed to a 5-inch square, so they're going to finish 4.5 inches. And then I've got some squares here that I'm going to cut in half in just a minute. And I'm going to show you how I arrived at the sizes I was using. So on your shaded or your corner pop instructions, notice I've written myself a great big note in green. Once you get your instruction sheets for your tools, you know, write yourself some notes. It makes it so much easier when you go back to try to do something. If you've figured something out about the best way for you to use that or the best way to know what to cut, highlight it or mark it, and then I've actually laminated it with a page laminator or just a sheet laminator. So you can do that. That way it's coffee proof. And I actually wrote on the laminate. It's not on the paper, it's on the laminate. But what I did was find the information I needed to know what I have to cut from my shaded 4-patch unit in order to be able to make it, replace it, trim it, so it's a precise size. So this is a 4.5-inch finished unit. So I'm ignoring the size I've trimmed it to. I've already done that, and I could go ahead and put it in my Going Quackers block now, but I want to chop off the corner and replace it. So in order to do that, I need the halfway point of my 4.5 inches, which is 2 1/4 inches. That's because when I get this stitched into my project, I want my pop of color to come halfway on my block. So I know 2 1/4 is my magic number. That's the number I'm going to use on my corner pop tool. Let me go to the overhead camera so you can see what I'm looking at. So my corner pop tool is here, and I'm going to trim away using the 2 1/4 line. Oh. And I've got my 2 1/4 line here. I'm going to turn it around this way so you can see it. You get this so maybe you can see it a little bit better. So I'm looking for the 2 1/4 inch line. There it is. I'm going to line it up right on my corner, and when I get it in place, I'm going to trim away the part that I don't need. All right. Now that's leaving a little flat spot on the edges here, which is fine because when I stitch this across, it's going to end up putting my seam allowances exactly where I need them to be. So I'm going to do that with all 4 pieces. There's my 2 1/4 line. And remember, I arrived at that because I want this to come halfway on my finished square, and my finished square is going to be 4.5 inches. So 2 1/4 is my halfway point. So anytime you're replacing a corner like this, all you have to know is how far into the finished block do you want your pop of color to be. So there's my 2 1/4 inch line. I do that on all 4 of these units. Then on the chart that is that I had laminated and I showed you, it tells me 2 1/4 was my magic number. I'll get it where you can't see the glare. That's my magic number, and it tells me to use a replacement triangle square size of 3.5. So I have 3.5 inch squares here cut. I actually only need 2 of them because I'm doing 4 squares. But once I cut this in half, I'm going to have 4 replacement triangles. And I'm just using the edge of my corner pop tool as a cutting guide. So I'm ready to stitch these. I don't even need this for this particular unit. So let's turn this, well, I don't have to turn anything. I just sit down. All right, so I've got my unit here. Now this, the shaded 4-patch that I've chopped off the corner is to size. It's not going to get trimmed. So I want to put that where I can see what I'm stitching. My triangle, my oversized triangle, is going on the bottom because it's not quite as important. I am going to trim that black triangle anyway, so I'm going to just turn it over. I tell you, let's just get rid of that thread because it's going to end up not having enough to do what I want to do today. So I'm having a terrible time. Sometimes this happens. Oh my goodness. Okay, so just so you know, on these RFL threads, I thought I could just grab the thread and pull it, but I'm just making it worse. That comes off, so you can actually find the thread tail, and it was wrapped around the bottom. I've already gotten it out. And then that little part, get rid of that. Get enough of this. Okay, this doesn't happen very often. Okay, so I've gotten to the final end. Now let's put this back on there. But that is intended to come off because there may be a reason why you would want the orange tab on the other end, and you could actually take this off and put it on the other end. It doesn't really matter for the way I'm going to put it on here, so I can just put it on my machine, put my end cap on it, and thread up. So how many of you did not know you could take the end of the RFL thread cap off? If you learned something new today, I've been successful. If I can get my needle threaded, we'll be in business. There we go. So now I'm ready to stitch. And I'm putting my triangle on the bottom, my trimmed corner pop unit, my shaded 4-patch unit goes on the top, and I'm going to stitch with my fabric right on my 1/4-inch patchwork. I'm just going to feed that through, and then I'm going to do the same thing. And all of them I need to put my trimmed unit on top so I can attend to that seam allowance and make sure it lines up where I want it to. I'm going to do that 4 times. Put that on bottom, put this on top. And by the way, we had our first real live and in-person class this Saturday. It was lots of fun. It was nice to be able to get back together. And we have several more classes scheduled. Some of them are sold out, so you can go on our website and purchase a class, and you can tell which ones actually still have seats left and which ones are sold out. But several of the classes are being offered more than one time, so you can choose a time that works best for you. So something to think about. All right, so I'm going to grab my fabric tag, and I'm going to park my needle. And now I'm going to real quickly go off camera for a second so I can press these back, and then I'll come back to my needle camera so you can see what I'm doing. You can actually sort of see me over here in the corner pressing back my corner pops. This is just a fun way to add a pop of color to a corner of a unit, and it can be a plain block like a snowball block. In this case, it's actually a pieced block, so that makes it have something kind of unusual sometimes in your blocks. Add just a little pizzazz, so something to think about. I just used just a little bit of acorn pressing solution to make those lay down nice and flat. So I'm ready to come back to my cutting area, and I'm ready to line up. Now, I trimmed away with the 2 1/4 inch line. That means now I'm going to do my trim down with my 2 1/4 inch line. Now notice, if you look closely at this, you've got a number 2 line and a number 2 1/2 line, and then there's a dash line in between. Guess what? That's what you're looking for. So I don't have a number 2 and a 4th here, but I can figure out that it's the one in between the 2 and the 2.5. Once I get that identified, I'm going to move the camera back so I don't keep hitting it. I'm going to line up the 2 1/4, the 2 1/4 inch line on my seam, and then I'm going to line up my ruler, the edges of my ruler on the edge of my shaded 4-patch unit. So the edge here and the edge here, because I'm really not wanting to trim away anything on my shaded 4-patch unit. So then I'm going to trim up and over and get rid of the excess on that popped corner. This is exactly a 1/4 inch here and a 1/4 inch here. So it's going to fit perfectly into the next seam that I'm going to do that. So I'm going to sit down real quick and take those corners off of there. And again, I'm looking for the 2 1/4 inch line. I'm going to line it up, and then I'm going to be watching to make sure that I'm lined up here and here. Another guideline to help you, there's a number 4 1/2 inch line right here. Since I know that's the halfway point of my shaded 4-patch, and that's right on that seam, I can actually put that 4 1/2 inch line on the seam, the cross seam, and that just gives me another little insurance that I'm getting a true 4 1/2 inch square, and my seams are lined up exactly where I need for them to be. So I'm going to do that 4 times, and then I'm going to take see if I can show you that. I was not on the right line, so it wasn't lining up where I wanted it to. So I'm looking for 3 things. I'm looking for the 2 1/4 line, I'm looking for the 4 1/2 line, and I'm looking for the edges here of my shaded 4-patch unit to make sure I'm lined up properly. And one more time, same thing, 2 1/4, 4 1/2, and the edges right here and right up here at the top. Now I have my 4 1/2 inch units. They're finishing 4 1/2. That's the finish size, because this is actually a 5-inch square. Remember, I told you that from the beginning. And you can also see that because here's a 5-inch grid, and I know that I'm lined up properly to get the precise size and placement I want here. So I am going to show you. Yeah, that's the right one. Nope, it's not. Hang on a second. All right, so here is, I'm going to see if I can back it out enough where you can see it, since I don't have the overhead camera. Believe it or not, every week I turn off everything and restart it just so I can make sure everything's working properly. And then things happen. You know how that works. All right, so here is my Wild Goose Chase sections. And I have 2 more that I can add here. And of course, you could have turned them around where they pointed in. That's totally okay. You can put yours together any way you want to. Then my shaded 4-patch with the popped off corner, which is really the Duck and Ducklings block, goes pointing in with that small triangle. And I purposely put black in my corners and my center, so it creates a secondary pattern. It's kind of like the shoe fly block. I could, if I wanted to, turn this around and put that pop of color on the outside corner. So that's another thing you can do. You don't have to arrange your squares the same way I do. But when I put these together, this is my choice of arrangement. So this measures 5 inches right now to finish 4 1/2. These measure 5 inches, so it's going to fit together and it's going to be just like I want it. So that is my Going Quackers block that's going in the center of my medallion. Now I want to show you a couple of things with the project page. So this is, I put so many pictures on here. Now I've got to find what I put on here that I wanted to share with you. Okay, so this is that border that we did a couple of weeks ago, and we had our choice of scrappy. Let me put this on top so you can see it. Or planned. This one's planned where they're all the same. This one's scrappy. So you got to choose that. And these were doubles, 2 geese together. And I have mine, my borders put together. But I have a problem. I'm going to show you how I fixed it and maybe give you some ideas of some things you could do. All right, so I have my border here. There's my border, and I'll kind of slide it back and forth. There's the center, and then I've got my doubles going out from the center. And remember, there actually is a seam across here. You could, of course, make this as a square squared, but since I was doing doubles of geese as I went through my project, they're all basically doubles of my flying geese. So I'm doing scrappy, and I get to the end of my last one, and I've moved it. There it is. And I discover, uh-oh, I don't have enough geese. So I've got the center. I've got one side of that border, but I need 6 more geese on the other side. So here's what I had to decide what I was going to do. Now, if I'm doing not scrappy, that wouldn't have been any big deal, because I could have just made another set of geese. Remember, every time you make your flying geese in the techniques that are used with the wing clipper tool, you get 4 geese just alike. But since I'm doing scrappy, I didn't want 4 geese just alike to line up right over here. So I decided, okay, I'm going to make them 1 goose at a time. And I've made several of them so that I have assorted colors, but I still need 1 more. And I'm going to show you how I made just 1 goose so that I could have a variety of colors. Of course, you could make the 4 at a time method and just have some leftovers. I decided it might be more helpful to show you what to do if, you need another goose and you don't want 4 just alike. So I have my squares cut as if I was going to do the 4 at a time method, a large square and 4 small squares. So I can actually do this with 1 large square and 1 small square in the same sizes I would have used, or I used when I was making these other geese that finish 1.5 by 3. So if I was doing the 4 geese, I would lay 1 square here, lay another square here, stitch across, and I would actually, remember, make sure I left a little space here at the back so that gives me a little more wiggle room. But I'm just wanting to make 1. So here's what I do. I'm going to take my small square and I'm going to cut it in half. And I need both halves to make 1 goose. Then I'm going to take my big square, and I need a longer ruler. I think this one will make it all the way across. And we're going to line that up. And we're going all the way across, and without moving anything, I'm going to turn my ruler and cut across the other way. Now, when I do this, I actually am going to have some leftover triangles, but I don't end up with 3 geese that I don't need. So I just need 1 triangle of my color and 2 triangles of my background that's going on the outside. These I'm going to just set them aside because there may be something later in the project that I want to use them for. So I'm just going to put them out of my way. So I'm ready to use just these 3 triangles to make my oversized goose. Now, a couple of things you have to remember. When I was doing this before and I was lining up on the corner, I wanted to make sure that I had a little wiggle room there in the corner. So I'm going to take my, and I'm doing this wrong, turn it this way. There, that looks better. Okay, so I need to leave the space on the outside of the bigger triangle. I don't have to leave the space here. I'm going to scooch it over to the edge where I lined that up, but I need that extra 2 or 3 threads on this outside edge. And then I'm going to stitch that, and I'm going to stitch off of a fabric tag onto my fabric. This is especially important when you're stitching onto a triangle like I am here. So I'm going to stitch, and then I'm going to get to my fabric tag and park my needle. I've got a lot of thread tails in my way today for some reason. Now, you have to press this triangle back before you add the next triangle, or you're going to have a problem. So I'm just going to give it a quick little finger press, and I just make little short motions so I don't rip my fingernail along that seam and stretch the whole thing out. Now this one, I'll put it down here and then I'll get my hands out of the way so you can actually take a screenshot of that if you need to. Where I need to line up is here. Where I need to leave that extra little bit of space is here. And then I'm going to stitch onto that. Give myself just a little bit of room. So off of my fabric tag, and I'm lined it up on the outside edge of this long side of my smaller triangle. And I'm going to park my needle. I've got all my stitching done for another goose. There it is. And it's made oversized, just like what I did when I was making 4 at a time. I can take this to my ironing board, give it just a little acorn pressing pin, and then I can use my wing clipper tool to trim that just like I did the others, and it'll match. So that's what you can do if you need just one goose to complete a project and you don't want 3 leftover geese. You could, of course, have those 3 leftover geese, put them in a project, make a pincushion out of it or a coaster. So there's things you could do with it. So I did want to share with you, your handout sheet will be in color, and you should already have seen this if you've downloaded your handout sheet. So there's the duck and ducklings, there's the going quackers, and there's the information about what sizes you need to cut for the flying geese, what sizes you need to cut for your shaded 4 patch, and using your tucker trimmer. So that kind of gives you that information. So the other thing I wanted to share with you, once we get all of the geese we need, let me get back over here, for those borders, you've got a blank corner. So you have several options. You could put a blank piece of fabric there, whatever color you wanted. I could put a burgundy corner, 4 of them on here, and that would look really attractive. I could also do a shaded 4 patch in that corner. I could also make a duck and ducklings corner, which is what I am suggesting with this handout sheet. This is page 6 on your handout sheet. Page 5 was just a picture of the duck and ducklings quilt with a bunch of blocks, all the same duck and ducklings. You're doing exactly the same technique, except that this needs to finish 3 inches instead of 4.5 inches. So the size squares you start with to do your shaded 4 patch are different. The size squares and the placement lines that you use on your corner pop are different, but that is exactly the same technique that you're going to be doing, that you did for the corners of your center medallion. And so then this picture doesn't show the duck and ducklings center medallion corners, but that's what mine's going to have on it, and mine's going to have assorted colors of the duck and ducklings corner. I put shaded 4 patch here. You could do that and just have that be your corners, but I'm going to go ahead and do the corner pop to do that. So I wanted to share with you what I'm actually going to be using. If I haven't shuffled it so much that I can't find my pieces, I think I'm good. Okay, so I have gathered together 4 different squares that will be on my shaded 4 patch, and I've got 4 background rectangles. That sizing information is on your page. And then I'm going to line up a square with a rectangle and stitch those. I'm not going to go through the whole process, but I am going to go through part of it just so you can kind of see where I was heading with my scrappy version. I wanted 4 different colors of my duck and ducklings, at least on the square part of it. And I'll show you options for what you can do with the other part. So I need 4 of those. And remember, the sizing is not the same as what you are using for the center medallion because these are quite a bit smaller units. So I'm going to grab my fabric tag, sew off and part my needle. And then this is where you're going to press away from your square. So I'm just going to give it a finger press so I can go to the next step because I want you to see what you need to do. So press away from the center, from the square toward the rectangle, no matter what color you're sewing. You're always going to press away from the square. That just makes everything lay down better later. Then you're going to buddy up a pair of them. It doesn't matter which 2 you're using. You're going to buddy those up and stitch them across. Line that up. And do the same thing. You're going to be happier if you feed them through the same combination. So I'm feeding through my rectangle first. That just makes it easier when you do the next step because they'll all be the same. They'll all look the same as you're working on it. So now I've got my 2 wonky 4 patches. If you watched a couple of weeks ago, or I guess it was just last week, you heard me say that because that's what you want to end up with. The 2 rectangles and the 2 squares opposite each other. Then you fold it in half and I clip a thread or so past my stitching line so that when I press that, it'll lay down flat. And again, you want to press away from your square. I'm just going to give it a quick finger press because I'm going to show you the next step. And then basically everything's done the same way that we did last week. So I'm going to press away from my square. Now I have a decision to make because what you do with these units is take a rectangle of the appropriate size, and that's on your paper too, and buddy it up with your wonky 4 patch. So there's my wonky 4 patch on my rectangle and my other wonky 4 patch in my rectangle. But guess what? That means that this shaded 4 patch and this shaded 4 patch share the same large triangle. If you don't want that, then you're probably going to want to make 4 separate wonky 4 patches and have 4 shaded 4 patches left over. But it's not going to be a problem for me to have 2 matching triangles because I can put them on opposite sides of my block. But now I need to make sure that I draw my lines on, and we'll talk about that just for a minute. Remember, this is where you have to have a 45-degree angle across here. If you have a tool that has a 45-degree angle, you could lay that on here, but here's my problem. I can't get all the way across. With your Tucker trimmer, and it was here a second ago, but we were doing other stuff with it, and it has disappeared. Do you see it? Ah, there it is. You can actually do this size, this step, with this size with your Tucker trimmer, and here's why. Here's my line here. My seam is what I'm looking at. I can line up any of those diagonal lines on one of those seams. We'll just pick this 3.5 because that one allows me to get all the way across my unit with my marking tool. So I want to make sure that I hit that intersection where those 2 lines crisscross, where those 2 seams crisscross. I'm going to put my number 3.5 just because that fits well and draw my line on. Notice it did not go straight into the corner. That's okay, it's still going to work. And then again, I'm going to turn it around, and you can actually see my seams here. I want to make sure one of my lines, they happen to be 45-degree lines. You don't have to know that. I'll just tell you they are. So now I know exactly where to stitch, and I'll stitch one of them just so you can see what goes on from here. There we go. And I'm going to stitch on my lines. And I want to cross over those intersections just on the inside of that intersection, because that gives me the point I want on my shaded 4 patch. And I'm just going to stitch over to the other point and stitch back the other way. Remember, if it doesn't go directly into the corner, it's not a big deal, because that's your seam allowance in between, and that's going to be, it's going to work just fine as long as you're at a 45-degree angle from that seam. All right, so now I have one shaded 4 patch. Let's back it up so you can see. One shaded 4 patch, 2 shaded 4 patches, and that's exactly what I want. Then I'm going to do the corner pop process just like I did for the larger units. The numbers are on your paperwork. Your next step at this point would be to cut between the lines, and remember, you can either trim that to where it's actually a 1/4 inch seam allowance. If it doesn't really matter to you, if it's exactly a 1/4 inch seam allowance, you can just cut between the 2 lines. I never worry too much about it because when I machine quilt it, I don't really see those seam allowance, and it's not a problem. So I don't usually take the time to cut that little extra piece out. And then I would press toward the larger triangle, and then it's ready to trim. You have to trim it first to the size that that first step on your handout says. You go back to here so you can see what I'm talking about. You first of all trim your shaded 4 patch. On your paperwork it'll say trim to 3.5 inches. You can't do the corner pop until this is an accurate square, and it can't be an accurate square till after you trim it. So you trim it to 3.5 inches, then you use the lines that it is explaining here to do the next step. Now, if you want to wait till next week, I'll be reviewing a little bit about that and talking about what you need to do there. So, any questions I need to deal with? Nope. All right. So you see, things don't always work the way I thought they would, but it's okay. We've still got one flying goose that I need for my project, and I've got 2 of my shaded 4 patches done, ready to trim. And then I'll add that pop of color. I am going to be using just a background square. I'll just show you on this so that my Duck and Ducklings unit has a color on the duckling part and a background on the outside corner. So that's what mine will look like, and I'll actually have 2 matching larger triangles. So you can do it that way, or you can make them all different if you feel like you need to. Of course, if you're doing a planned matching border, then it won't really matter, and you can decide what colors you want for that particular unit anyway. All right, so if you are considering taking a class, I would encourage you to sign up soon so that you get the classes you want. Right now, I have classes scheduled to the end of July, and there's even a couple of classes in August that are already scheduled, and I'll be adding some as time goes on. If you are interested in a class that's already full, give us a call and we'll put you on the wait list. And so, by the way, the classes are hybrid. If there are people who want to do via Zoom, then I'll provide a Zoom link for you to take the class at the same time that we're doing the class here in the shop. So something for you to think about. So until next week, happy sewing, and look for your handouts in the file, and it'll have the pictures and the pages that I showed you today. So happy sewing. We'll see you next week.